In this video, I am going to discuss what I like to call the three different versions of the Roman Empire. The first, which we will talk about, starts with Julius Caesar. And even though Rome wasn't a functioning empire at that point, Caesar was trying to push it in that direction. The second version starts with Augustus, and this is where Rome starts to function as a true empire. And there is a third version, which we will discuss, that involves Diocletian. Before we get to the end of the Republic, I thought I would step back and examine some of the factors that led to the formation of the Roman Empire. In the centuries before Augustus started the empire, Roman generals often used their legions for political gain, and the situation became increasingly chaotic. There were also changes to the Roman army, slave revolts, groups of people that demanded full citizenship, and a growing number of people living under Roman rule. Many of these factors were only natural considering the rapid expansion of Rome's territory. In many respects, this was more of a psychological problem. I mean, give the Roman army a land to conquer, and they would capture it like no one else. But how do you solve complex social problems? Well, all of this led to increasing tensions between rival political factions. Roman senators and generals exploited these tensions for political gain. This really became apparent when Sulla did the unthinkable by leading his legions into Rome, where he soon began purging political rivals. In Sulla's mind, he was saving the traditions of the Roman Republic. But in reality, he contributed to its demise, as the next generation of Roman generals completely tossed out all concepts of tradition and custom. So it is Sulla who is generally seen as having set the precedent for Caesar's later march on Rome. Cicero comments that Pompey once said, quote, "If Sulla could, why can't I?" Well, Sulla certainly set the example, proving that it could be done, and therefore inspired later generals to attempt it. And in many respects, this accelerated the end of the Republic. Now, as the 1st century BC rolled along, the competition between various factions in the Roman Senate only increased. This was a competition between Roman aristocrats, a sort of Game of Thrones. Of course, the Roman Senate had always been a very competitive place. Each senator wanted to establish his mark on Roman history. They wanted to be the next great general. The difference during this time period was that Roman generals like Sulla were willing to violate Rome's most time-honored traditions in order to achieve their goals. This would have been unthinkable in the past. Any general who even attempted to march on Rome would have been arrested and immediately put on trial. But now Roman armies backed up their generals because the legions were loyal first and foremost to the Roman general they served under. And Roman generals did everything in their power to keep their soldiers loyal. Now, as I mentioned before, Rome during the 1st century BC was a very competitive place. There were literally hundreds of Roman aristocrats all competing for power and glory. The easiest way to achieve fame was through military success. Pompey had done just that, and by 70 BC was the most significant person in Rome. The other way was through money, and Crassus had a lot of that. During this time period, Caesar had not yet achieved military fame, and he was not even close to the personal wealth of Crassus. So what could Caesar do? How could he win elections to the most coveted Roman offices? Well, Caesar chose to establish his base with the lower classes. He did what many Roman senators loathed. He made his way through the poorest parts of Rome, appealing to the less fortunate. These areas were very dirty and smelly, but Caesar had no problem walking among the streets of Rome, and it was here where Caesar built his power base. At this point, Pompey and Crassus had a decision to make. Caesar was a growing threat, so they either had to ally with him or destroy him. In the end, they decided to ally with Caesar, forming the first triumvirate. It was through this unofficial alliance that Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar effectively controlled the Roman Senate. Now, I do want to point out that Roman politics was never as simple as just one person against another. Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus had literally hundreds of individuals pushing them in a particular direction. In fact, I believe it was Pompey who stated that he no longer felt he had any control over his own decisions. I also want to point out that picking a particular side or faction was really a life and death matter. And if you ended up on the losing side, it could result in your death, or if you were lucky, just exile. In any event, the first triumvirate eventually fell apart after the untimely death of Crassus. This led to a war between Pompey and Caesar. The Senate sided with Pompey and ordered Caesar back to Rome. Caesar knew his life was in mortal danger without his army, and so he famously crossed the Rubicon, ignoring the Senate's orders to disband his legions. Caesar ultimately defeated Pompey in 48 BC. Leaving him as the sole master of Rome. So it was Caesar who made the first serious attempt to nudge Rome towards an empire. And so I like to refer to this as version 1.0. By this time, the central government in Rome had become very weak, with little control over the provinces. Roman governors often looted the provinces for personal gain. Caesar saw it as his mission to restore order to the Republic and central government. He asked the Senate to make him dictator for life, though he did not request the title of Rex or king. To many Roman aristocrats, however, Caesar was acting more and more like a king. The Romans, of course, had removed their kings centuries earlier, and so they decided to assassinate Caesar in 44 BC. Now, it's important to note that although many Roman aristocrats could not tolerate the idea of Caesar as dictator, the Roman people certainly had no problem with this, and it was they who demanded revenge after Caesar's assassination. This, of course, led to 2 more civil wars, and finally it was Augustus who emerged victorious and slowly started to convert the Republic into an empire. The traditional start date for the empire is 27 BC, and this is what I like to refer to as version 2.0. Augustus was very careful in his role as emperor. He saw what happened to Julius Caesar, so he wanted to work with the Roman Senate on titles that were acceptable to both sides. In other words, he wanted to assume power, but he wanted to keep around the illusion of a republic, not a monarchy. And so many of the institutions of the republic were kept in place. In fact, legally, the republic still existed. Even the Roman Senate still held some power, though the role of the Senate had been greatly reduced. To maintain this illusion, the Senate was allowed to retain control of a few legions while the rest of the army reported directly to Augustus. In addition, the Senate maintained control of a few token provinces, while Augustus controlled the rest. Augustus also assumed the title of princeps. This stood for first among equals, but Augustus still wore the toga, which was the dress code of the Senate. He didn't dress as an emperor, and senators could still approach him and discuss governmental proceedings. He maintained the illusion that he was still just one of the guys. This is important because Augustus didn't want to appear that he was ruling by decree, even though the Senate pretty much rubber-stamped all of the legislation he proposed. To maintain this carefully cultivated image of the humble first citizen, Augustus did not build any grand palaces for himself. He lived the simple life. His home was known for its modesty. Augustus allowed no marble inside his house, and the floors were constructed with a simple black and white tile. Augustus realized that the Republic was in a state of decay. Decades of civil wars had greatly damaged Rome and the surrounding provinces. Many cities and highways were suffering from neglect. As a result of this, Augustus had numerous buildings and roads repaired throughout his reign. The projects were so successful that Augustus claimed he, quote, found Rome of brick and left it of marble, end quote. The ultimate beneficiaries under Augustus's reign were the provinces. During the late Republic, the provinces were consistently terrorized and looted by the Roman governors assigned to them. The governors were now made to answer directly to the emperor. They ruled in the emperor's name and were expected to run the provinces wisely. Peace was returned to the people living there, and they no longer had to worry about extortion and terror. Provinces became prosperous and efficient once again. Augustus was highly successful in these efforts, and his actions stabilized the Roman Empire for centuries. But in the 3rd century, things began to fall apart yet again, and the Roman Empire nearly collapsed under the combined pressures of civil wars, plagues, and economic depression. During a 50-year period, there were at least 26 claimants to the title of emperor. Most of these claimants were Roman generals who were looking to make a name for themselves. Clearly, reforms were needed once again to save Rome from destruction, and the person up to the task was Diocletian. This is the version of the empire that I refer to as 3.0. Diocletian decided to increase the power and image of the emperor. He dropped the pretense that the emperor was not truly a monarchical office. The emperor, for the first time in public, dressed in the imperial purple. Diocletian also dropped the title of princeps and assumed the title of dominus, which stands for lord or master. In addition, you could no longer address the emperor directly, and literally you had to bend the knee before you spoke to him. Furthermore, Diocletian worked to reduce the Roman Senate's participation in military and administrative matters. Diocletian also created the Tetrarchy, which divided the Roman Empire into 4 parts called dioceses. However, it quickly fell apart after Constantine unified the empire under one ruler. The time period in which the emperors used the title of princeps has been referred to as the Principate. This lasted from Augustus all the way up to Diocletian. From Diocletian onwards, the reign of the emperors has been referred to as the Dominate period.